not winning 90% of your new business because you have some sort of incredible value.
I'm going to take a bit of a different angle.
We got a budget this big. I'm going to give it to you because you have a really killer plan.
You give a Red Bull to a turtle, what do you expect?
I think that's a dead turtle. So let's move on to...
Eureka. Cheers.
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 Does your current premium finance company lock you into long-term agreements? That's because they don't want you talking to us. At IFS, we win your business the good old-fashioned way, with customer service. I know you don't always have to use a premium finance company, but when you do, you should use IFS. Cheers.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Insurance Pint podcast. As always, I'm your host, Tom Reed, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Steve Earle, CEO of Cheap Insurance, Adam Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell & Whale, and Jeff Roy, CEO of Excalibur Insurance. And we're pleased today to be joined by two special guests. We have Don Forgeron, who's the CEO of Ibc. Don, how's it going? And we have James Fordham, who's actually, I don't even know James's title, so we'll get James to introduce himself in a minute. So, Don, Rank has this privilege. We'll get you to do a quick intro of yourself first, then we'll turn it over to James.
Thanks, Tom, and hi, everybody. President and CEO of IBC, been with the company almost 30 years, started on the East Coast, which is where family's roots are. Background in chemistry, which of course everybody knows is a prerequisite for getting into the insurance industry. And worked for the federal and provincial governments in a long ago previous life.
Great. Well, we're tied then because I have a degree in chemical engineering, which is equally as useful for the insurance business. So, James, do you want to give us a background on yourself and enlighten me on your title and role while you're doing it?
Sure. Thanks, Tom, and good afternoon. Yeah, I'm James Fordham, Vice President, Industry Information Services, and I'm the CIO at IBC. I joined IBC when I first came to Canada 15 years ago, and IBC was my first employer and my only employer within Canada.
All right, let's go to our speed round, and Jeff can dive into a little more detail on our guests here.
Okay, awesome. All right, this goes out to both Don and James. This is our famous speed round for all our Pint listeners, just to unpack it, to know a bit more about you. I want to first of all know which, for both of you, name your favorite Canadian band or musician of all time.
The one that springs to mind is Tragically Hip have grown on me in the 15 years that I've been here.
Correct answer.
They're Canada's best kept secret.
Yeah, they were, and I was a late convert to the hip, giving away my age. Bachman Turner Overdrive kind of defined my high school years.
Taking care of business, low BTO. I like it. That's great. What do you guys like to do in your free time? Your favorite hobbies or sports or anything?
Yeah, a lot of sports, golf, tennis, hockey, cycling, all of the above. Not nearly enough of it to satisfy me, but and I miss the days when golf used to be such a big part of business, right? I mean, you used to take people out golfing.
Did that change? I missed that memo. Was I supposed to stop golfing for work? Nobody told me.
James, what's your sport or hobby or interest?
I have no spare time. I have 4 young boys. I have absolutely no spare time. But when I do, in the future, golf would be lovely.
Your drink of choice. If you're going to a pub or a bar, what would you order?
I'm a bit of a wine drinker, red preferably, but also white. But a gin and tonic on a warm summer day is a pretty nice way to spend an afternoon.
Great. James?
Old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned. Okay, great mixture there. Oh. And last question, now that COVID's over, have you traveled to any great spot? And if you haven't, where's your next big trip going to be to?
I just did my first 2 international trips in the last 2 years. So I'm the president of an international association, so it takes me overseas several times a year. Anyway, I was to Prague, where I had never been. Spent a week there for meetings, and 10 days ago was in Dubrovnik in Croatia, on the Adriatic Sea. Stunningly, I was only there for 46 hours, but long enough to see how beautiful a place it is.
James?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back to England.
Besides Disney World with the kids?
Disney World, Harry Potter World might be a spot in the future, but this summer we're going over to the UK.
Okay, great. All right, guys, we want to keep things rocking here. We got some great information, so thanks for the speed round.
All right, so we'll get right into it. First, I just want to do a quick shout out to our sponsors. So big thanks to IFS Premium Finance, who's our premier sponsor, as well as the Crew Group, Garrison's Brewery, and our charity partner WIC. So let's get into it here, Don. So maybe let's start with the basics. I'll give us the first question, and the guys can jump in here. But what does the IBC actually do?
Some of the simplest questions are the toughest ones, right? Well, we do a lot of things, but the traditional trade association work that we do is probably not that dissimilar to what brokers associations do across the country, and IBAC does for you nationally, right? We advocate on behalf of our members. That usually, is in the area of public policy. So trying to work with governments provincially and federally to change auto insurance systems, to improve outcomes for consumers, whether it's changes to benefits or changes to premiums and so on. Climate change, I probably spend more time talking and doing work on climate change now than auto insurance or any form of insurance. Regulatory matters. OSFI is recognized around the world as one of the preeminent regulators. They keep us real busy. Provincial regulators also do that. So that we do some other things, and James can talk a little bit at some point about some of the products that we make available to members that are usually grounded in data that we collect. But in terms of pure trade association business, it's on the advocacy side that IBC would spend the bulk of its time.
And I do remember many, many years ago learning about IBC by actually having to fix some green sheet errors way back in the day. So you talk about dating yourself. I've just dated myself.
Don, how many members?
They tell me about 115. I don't count them. I've got a board of 15 industry CEOs that I probably spent the bulk of my time with. But we're always, like any trade association, we're always looking for new members. Membership in IBC is voluntary. I understand the Canadian Bankers Association, all banks must be members of the Canadian Bankers Association. What a wonderful world that must be, where it doesn't matter how good or bad you are, and they are good, but members are forced to join. That's not the case with us, and this year we've attracted a few mutual companies to join, and AIG has joined after 10 years of Lynn Oldfield and I having many breakfasts and lunches and me courting her. She's finally said yes.
So for our listeners who are mostly, well, not mostly brokers, but there's a ton of brokers, you are basically the Brokers Association, but of insurance companies. So you have directs, you have mutuals, you have insurers of all different stripes, and you advocate on their behalf with respect to government and everything that you had said. What kind of cool stuff do you do that might sort of, as brokers, we'd be interested in?
I think there's probably, Steve, too. I'm going to get James to jump in with some of the he does all the cool stuff at IBC. Some of the other stuff that might be considered cool or at least remotely interesting for brokers is the work that we've been doing on climate change, on natural catastrophes, how we go into communities after a disaster, help connect people with either their brokers or their insurance companies to kind of get that claim process underway. The work that we've done with the federal government and now provincial governments on getting a national flood program, we can talk, for hours about how not nearly enough Canadians are insured for flood. And we've been working to try and change that by developing a national flood program. So you brokers will have a flood product to sell at some point down the road. So those are, I guess, a couple of things that we do that are on the ground that brokers will see sort of the net result of that. But James, if you want to offer a comment or two about some of the products that we make available that some brokers would probably be aware of, actually.
Yeah, sure. Whether they would be categorized as cool or not is questionable. But yes, we deliver industry products like Clear. That's the Canadian Loss Experience Automobile Rating System. It gives you a relative risk ranking for every vehicle that's on the roads across the country. Vin Link is another one that decodes the 17-digit VIN that's assigned to any vehicle. Decodes it for carriers and brokers to identify the make, model, the weight of the vehicle, all of those kind of characteristics. So we deliver a significant number of industry products across the industry and to a variety of stakeholders. But I can gladly talk about that all day long.
So I have one last question before I let these guys jump in. And you mentioned board, and so brokers represent 50+% of the marketplace. Is your board representative of broker representation insofar as market share, Don?
Oh, absolutely, Steve. It's probably disproportionate to companies who distribute their products through brokers or have multi-channel distribution channels. We have, for all our committees, including our board, we have a diversity profile that we've created to make sure that whether it's a committee or working group or the board, that it represents the industry writ large. So we don't want 16 members of the board and 15 of them are from Ontario and the rest of the country isn't represented, or they're all direct writers and the brokers aren't represented, or vice versa. So we have this diversity profile that we follow pretty closely, and brokers are well represented around the table. I should just quickly add, though, on the issue of distribution, we have been for many years channel agnostic. So it's a competitive issue for our members, but IBC doesn't take a view one way or the other, and we stay well clear of any issues that have a sort of distribution connotations, because those are things for our members to decide, not for their trade association.
What are you guys seeing for trends? I mean, there's a lot happening in the world right now with stock markets down, wars starting up, pandemics. You brought up climate change and how that's affecting. Like, what are you seeing changing as of late, or maybe over your career?
Adam, I'll go with as of late, as opposed to my career. The panel I mentioned a little while ago in Dubrovnik, I was on a panel with a couple of regulators, one from Hong Kong, one from the state of Connecticut, and a chief risk officer from a large Hong Kong-based life insurer. And our panel was all about risk and what are the risks. And of course, for regulators, they did some audience polling, and 6 or 7 of them came up, and we had to choose 3, and the regulators chose them all because they worry about everything. And you've touched on some of the things that we're worried about. Inflation, no question, is going to have and already is having an impact on our sector. I'm in the midst of building a house. I can vouch for the impact inflation would have on rebuilding costs, say, for example. But our industry dealt with inflation before, and we've dealt with it, well. Before COVID, physical damage inflation on auto insurance was a really big issue for us in many parts of the country. The cost of repairing vehicles had shot up. Obviously, this is pre-pandemic, so it was really just the cost. It was peculiar to vehicle damage. So that's a concern. The economy writ large is a concern. Interest rates, right? So for for the positive news that higher interest rates brings. Regulators are equally concerned, on the other side of the coin. So I do think for insurers writ large, higher interest rates are probably going to bear out well in terms of overall impact. Climate change, a huge issue. Not enough time can be spent on it. We've spent a lot of time as a country talking about how do we get CO2 emissions down. We've spent almost no time talking about how do we adapt to what's already in the atmosphere, and we're seeing it play out. What happened in Lytton, BC last year is mind-boggling, fellas. 49.5 degrees Celsius. 49.5 degrees Celsius was the temperature, and then the next day, the whole town went up in flames, and 600 people in BC died as a result of heat, not the fire, but as a result of this heat dome that they had in BC. So we're already seeing the effects, and our federal government has not spent enough time on trying to help us adapt to what's already staring us in the face, let alone what's coming down the road. Cyber, another huge threat. And the industry is invested in two ways in this, right? I mean, we sell product, not as much as people would like, but for very good reasons. The industry hasn't been able to come up with a product and price it and sell it, in large volumes. And we're also a target. So cyber is a huge issue. There was a panel at this conference I was at just devoted to cyber, and it was absolutely depressing. You walked out of the room thinking this stuff isn't insurable. You just can't insure against cyber risk when you've got nation states engaged in cyber warfare, and it's warfare. And now you're looking at war exclusions in policies and so on. It really makes you wonder how the industry is going to wrap its arms around cyber and create a product that's affordable that you guys can sell to small, and medium-sized and large business owners. But to develop an affordable product is going to be challenging. So Adam, there are no shortages of things, but we're trade associations are paid to worry, and so we have lots that we can worry about.
What's your biggest worry? Like if any of those were to be graded, or the one that keeps you most awake at night while worrying?
What's a black swan event that is the most likely to happen? Is it climate, like an earthquake in BC, and then a hurricane at the same time, and the reinsurance market gets completely creamed, and then all of a sudden we're scrambling around for capacity? Is that? I'm just curious. What is your black swan?
I didn't even mention earthquakes, Jeff. Thanks for that, because the earthquake is the one event that can take the industry down. And so it's another file that we've been working on with the federal government for several years now, trying to come up with a plan, because PASIC, the corporation that's designed to pay claims for companies that fail, PASIC would just be wiped out if there is a large earthquake off the coast of BC, which, by the way, not that you can put it this way, but we are somewhat overdue. We're the only place on that whole ring of fire that hasn't had a huge event. A pandemic, as we found out, is one of these black swan events that you just can't prepare for. I attended a dinner before the pandemic, and there were sitting around a table with about 25 other people, much smarter than me about all of these sort of black swan event issues, and their fear, and it was fairly unanimous around the table. Their fear was a large cyber event that took down the financial sector. That's what they feared the most, that some nation state would figure out a way to do that. And we've seen, air traffic control systems impacted. We've seen oil distribution disrupted as a result of some of these attacks. So that's what they came up with. I don't have a personal favorite. I worry about them all.
And so the sum of all their parts just forced you to retire.
I pledged to work long enough to fix Ontario Auto. And
how many versions? How many changes? Are you through 10 or 12? How many versions have you gone through? Do you remember? Are you at past 10 or 12 by now in your time frame?
Well, that old definition of insanity, right? That's Ontario Auto. right? Over and over and over again.
Hey, quick question. Let's shift gears here. Tell us about the PR work you do for the individual consumers. You mentioned about some of the advocacy, and I've seen some great information about, catastrophes and global warming and climate change. But also, you were very involved with the pandemic with lots of information. Maybe to share some of the great stuff your PR side of your business does for the benefits the entire industry.
So I guess, Jeff, one of the things we try and do under the umbrella of advocacy, whether you call it government relations or public relations or communications, is to try and get ahead of some of these issues before they really cause problems. Because by the time an elected official has sunk his or her teeth into an issue, it's too late. You've got to solve these things long before it gets to question period in the House or lands on a minister's desk. So a couple of examples would be the hard commercial market. In the fall of 2019, we established a commercial task force representation across the country. We had brokers on it in different parts of the country, and we tried to get ahead of what was coming. Right, we knew that the commercial market had hardened, was going to continue to harden, and then all of a sudden you throw the pandemic on top of it, and it just made a bad situation much worse. And there was a lot of advocacy at the provincial government level, also at the federal government, but at the provincial government level, to try and educate them on why rates were going up, why the market had hardened, why coverage was hard to find for some lines of business, as you guys know better than anybody. And so we spent an awful lot of time with them. We even we created what we called a business insurance action team, which would help those really hard done by customers, especially in the hospitality space, to hook them up with brokers and with companies to try and get coverage placed. And so that was, there was PR obviously involved in that, if you want to call it that, but it was a lot of educating elected officials. The same with the pandemic. We spent a lot of time with regulators, with elected officials, with CEOs around our board table and elsewhere, talking and thinking through what we needed to do as an industry to try and respond. And we had a call with the Minister of Finance in Ontario, long since gone, but he told us during this call that if we weren't part of the solution, an active part of the solution, that they would see us as part of the problem. And that really served to get our CEOs coalescing around what did they need to do to try and be seen as part of the solution. So people had parked their cars, businesses were shuttered, and things had changed. So the premiums that we were collecting were based on one set of risk profiles, and now suddenly everything had changed. And so the industry gave back billions, literally billions with a B, billions of dollars in refunds. And I know, the flip side of that is that was a hardship for many brokers, that had to go through. It sounds simple, right? We'll just give consumers back refunds. We know that there's another side to doing that, but it was important that we did it. A lot of time spent around the IBC board table. We have 4 board meetings a year. In 2020, I think we had 10, and the other 6 were devoted to the pandemic and what the industry needed to do for customers on the personal line side and on the commercial line side as well. And I think we came through it pretty good. I'm immensely proud of what the industry did at every level, right? From brokers to adjusters who responded to disasters in the middle of the pandemic, to insurers, to the work that regulators did and elected officials. We really served Canadians. And I would put our sector up against any sector of the economy and look at what we did and compare it to what anybody else did. And I think we got a lot to be proud of.
So Don, you've recently announced your retirement and talked about black swan events and what good the industry did in COVID and so on. So maybe you can leave us with a couple of things, like what, from your perspective, throughout your career, what thing or series of things made you the proudest to be part of the insurance industry, and what message would you like to give to the generation that comes after you?
First of all, I've been just so privileged, to have the position I've had for the last 13 years at IBC. It's just been such a tremendous honor because I got to do some amazing things. I got to work with some incredibly talented people in all corners of the industry. Again, from industry CEOs, member company staff, brokers, agents, adjusters, governments. There's just, the list goes on and on. And I am so immensely proud of this industry that we represent. And I know oftentimes we forget how important the work is that we do, right? I mean, we get caught up in the business of business. We're all trying to make a living. You guys are running small businesses. You're trying to meet payroll. You're trying to grow. You're trying to look after your family and the families of others. But the underlying work that we do is incredibly important. We had a federal regulator who once said that we were the oxygen of the economy, because without us, there's nothing, right? Cars don't drive, businesses don't run, buildings don't get built if it weren't for the work that our industry does. And then when there is an event like a Fort McMurray fire or a hailstorm in Calgary or flooding in New Brunswick, you pick your disaster. We are there. We are there all the time. And we do it better than anybody else in terms of getting people back on their feet. Now, my team always says don't end on a negative, but one of the things that does worry me is our ability to continue to do that. And I say that when I think of things like flood insurance and the fact that when there are events, a disproportionate share of the damage is now not insured. And we have to fix that. We have to figure out a way to make sure that more people are insured for the damages that they're going to incur, because the danger is that we'll become irrelevant, right? If there's a flood, take last fall's flood in BC, a multi-billion-dollar event, I don't know, $7, $8, $9, $10 billion in damage. Only about $400 or $500 million of that was insured. So if you're the provincial government in BC, you're shouldering, pretty much all of this burden, and our industry is shouldering very little. If we continue down that road, governments will question why we're there, why they need to work with us, and consumers will begin to question that as well. So and cyber is another one, right? We're not as an industry, again, for good reason, but we're not the insurance gap, as they call it, is huge as it relates to cyber. So that's something that I think we need to address as we go forward. But Tom, it's a great industry, phenomenal industry. My daughter joined the industry, as Steve well knows. She did it without talking to me. Not that I think I would have tried to talk her out of it, because I don't think I would have. And she's enjoyed it immensely. I think it's a great industry. The sad part is people tend to fall into our industry. Tom with your chemical engineering degree and me with my chemistry degree. I think we need to figure out a way to reach young people and let them know what an exciting and fulfilling career you can have in our industry, and try and attract more of them than we have in the past. So perhaps I'll pause there.
I think on behalf of the industry, Don, thanks for all your hard work the last 13 years. It's great. You've done a great job. You've got everybody working together. And again, I've learned a lot just from our last 35 minutes together. So thanks for what you've done for the industry.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that.
Okay, James, let's get on to Dash here. So heard a lot of some interesting, very high level conversation that we had with Don. And let's get into a little more, not into the weeds per se, because this is still pretty high level, but let's talk about Dash and what you guys are doing there. So first, maybe just for the benefit of ourselves and for our audience, you can just tell us, what is Dash? What does it stand for? What's the point of Dash? What are you guys trying to do there? Maybe just give us a background there. Then we'll jump into some questions.
So Dash is the name that we've given to a product that's still under development. We're not going to be going live until likely January, at least Q1 of 2023. It stands for Driver and Auto Search History. And what it does is use the industry's data to provide a report on every insured, on their insurance history, claims history, percentage at fault. So clearly, very important information in the underwriting process and the pricing process, and even to be used by SIUs.
How do you anticipate this making the lives of consumers and brokers better? And I get it from a carrier perspective, access to data, cheaper, better, more accurately, most likely. That's great. Works well for them, sure. What about brokers and consumers? How's it going to make their lives better?
I mentioned the data. Obviously the data is central in the pricing of risk and issuing of policies. But one of the big things with Dash is that brokers are not going to be billed for the use of the product. The cost of delivering the product is going to be incurred by carriers based on market share, allocated through market share. And it's not going to be billed per transaction. So brokers and carriers alike can essentially use Dash until, so long as they have the appropriate privacy consents in place, can use the product and run as many transactions as they like without having to assign a report to a carrier if you're a broker. And so that gives it a pretty serious advantage, and the usability of Dash will be very positive. We're going to be issuing an API guideline for brokers and for carriers, so they can build a system-to-system interface for Dash. It's also going to be available via a web portal. We expect to see more traffic going through the system-to-system interface, but the web portal will be available for those carriers and brokers that don't want to go through the expense of developing that interface, that system interface.
In that light, have vendors been engaging? Have the BMS vendors been engaging? The rating vendors been engaging with you on this project?
Yeah, they have. So maybe just a word on how the product is being guided. The carriers, the participating carriers. So we've got 29 carriers representing about 91% of the industry that are guiding the development of the product, and they oversee it. In addition to that, we're working with IBAO, we're working with IBAC, we're working with all of the brokers associations to make sure that the broker community are aware of what we're doing. And we're beginning to have conversations with the sizable commercial entities that provide services to the broker community, so the BMS providers. So yes, they're aware, and yes, they're involved.
Right now, the carriers, like the BMS vendors, charge us to do pre-fill, which this information is now being paid for by the client. So can we expect that cost to go down or go away on the brokers, or are they going to continue to pass on the same price but take more of a margin? Is that a fair question to ask, or is that too into the weeds?
It's a totally fair question to ask. The answer isn't quite there yet, because we're still working with the BMS providers. We're still working on sort of commercial agreements that may or may not be put in place here. So I think it's a fair question, but there's probably not a detailed answer to give you at this point.
I guess my question is, why so long? This is all information that IBC and its members have been providing to somebody else in order to charge back to all its IBC members and their distributors, be it brokers or whatever. So, I mean, number one, yeah, good on you. But why did it take so long? Was it the APIs that you needed? Was it technology? And what preempted this?
I would say that the reason it's taken so long is because there's another product in the market that delivers kind of comparable services, comparable searches, but that it was it's a service provider that makes a profit out of it, and I think it's taken the industry an extensive amount of time to kind of figure out that they can likely do it better. And if I take my example, or take IBC's involvement in this as an example, we've been talking about this for over 4 years, and we've been working through a task force, through a standing committee, through our board. And it's only in the last 2 years that we kind of obtained the funding and the appropriate authorities to develop Dash. So I guess it's a sort of a long-winded way of saying probably asking the wrong people as to why it's taken as long as it has taken to get an industry-owned product together.
Once Dash is running, will that for-profit business be cut off from the information?
Almost certainly not, Steve. The industry have decided they want to build a competitive product, an industry-owned competitive product to CGI's Auto Plus. And that needs data. And so the industry have secured access to their data. But I don't expect there to be an impact on the feed of data to CGI for the services, the products and services that they deliver with that data.
James, which companies will be able to use Dash? Do you have to be a member of IBC to get access to it? Can anybody access it? You mentioned about it being funded by how much volume you have, but I'm assuming you have to be a member of IBC to be able to use it. Is that correct? Or
no, you don't actually, because we're reliant on 100% of the industry's data. This is one of the products that IBC is delivering and making available to any carrier that wanted to sign up to participate in the development. When I say participate, I mean kind of A, fund, and B, test and make sure that it's going to be fit for purpose by the time it goes live. So we've got 29 individual carriers signed up. They represent about 91% of the market. And it will be those 29 carriers and their subsidiaries and agents and brokers that will be able to access Dash when it's live.
Can other people join after if they didn't, help bake the bread? Can they help consume it later, or you have to jump into the ground level?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yes, they can jump in later. There is what we call a levy to join. So that levy is your portion of the development cost plus a relatively small premium to jump in at a later date. So that 9% of the market that remains, they will have the opportunity to join later.
I'm going to guess that brokers are probably the only group that reads Auto Pluses more than underwriters, as the ratio's got to be 2 or 3 to 1 on the pull. Are there any broker representations at the table as far as to how to design this sort of look and feel of an output?
Yeah, so we're working with a task force, the Industry Products Task Force, and that is made up just of carriers. But over the past 6-12 months or so, I've been working with the broker associations, so met with IBAC and presented to their technology committee, and have since been working very closely with Colin Simpson of IBAO, who's kind of the appointed broker interface. And yes, they are having input in what the report contains, how it's delivered, how it's accessed. Those kinds of conversations we're actively having with the broker community.
So, James, you keep using the term report, which I understand why you use that term. I guess when I think about this, I think, API, I think data movement back and forth. I think I order a report and it goes to the carrier or goes to Dash and comes back and populates, the appropriate report data into my BMS. Is that kind of where you're heading with, with this portal being sort of a catch-all for somebody who doesn't want to do it that way? But like, what is the main thrust? Is it more digital data back and forth?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tom. So we expect about 90% of the transaction volumes are going to be going through the system-to-system API. About 10% will be coming through the web portal. And as I mentioned, that'll be for carriers either that don't leverage the larger BMS provider technology, and as you say, they're kind of a catch-all for the remaining for the remaining stakeholders that have access to the system.
Which hopefully goes away when people realize the system is way more efficient and effective and much less of a pain in the arse.
Bit of a training though curve, like making sure all the data when you're reading the Auto Plus versus populating the system, there will be a bit of a transition. One question I have is what data is included? One of the big pitfalls in Ontario is commercial driver history. It's a nightmare. People have worked for somebody, they're on a fleet policy. Are you able to dig into some of that commercial driving history with, do you have other data sets that we can't reach that CGI is not tapping into, or is it kind of repurposing what's already out there at the current time?
Yeah, commercial is tricky because the nice thing about the private passenger data is it's reported through a mandatory stat plan. And so the data is reported consistently across the industry, and as I say, we tap into that for Dash. The commercial data is just not reported in the same way, so it's very difficult to get a comparable picture on commercial policies and commercial history than it is for private passenger. We have, as you would imagine, as we go through the development cycle with the task force, the industry have flagged commercial use and commercial policies. They've flagged other things like MVRs and additional enhancements that we expect to get to once the system is live, and once we've sort of delivered the bread and butter, then we will move to those enhancements and really kind of turn our attention to how do we solve this.
Let's step forward to January/Q1 of 2023. Dash is implemented. It's a resounding success immediately. Everybody, throws a ticker tape parade for you, James. What's next? The data that goes into an Auto Plus is only one part of the hurdle that brokers face in terms of getting quick, ready access, accurate, efficient data. Is there a part two? Is there other things you guys are going to look down the road and try to solve, like MVRs, driver's license, one-click driver's license kind of things? What's on the roadmap?
Or even feeding whether a policy is active or not to a police system.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, that last question relates to a product that we've already got live, which is called the Insurance Validation Program. But maybe I'll talk about that in a minute if it's of interest. But what's next for Dash? One of the things that IBC does as its bread and butter is pull the industry together, pull its members together, and we have conversations. And for each of the products, you heard me talk earlier about, we've got Clear, we've got Vin Link, we've got HCAI. For each of the products that we own, we create an industry advisory group. So that's an industry body that represents the industry in discussions about the future of our products, the future direction of the products, enhancements, investments that we want to make. So the advisory group that will be set up once we go live with Dash will tell us what the future has in store. But those things that you mentioned, of those things, I suspect that MVR will be access to the MVR data in Dash will be one of the highest priorities. Commercial data is another priority that we expect to hear. So yeah, there is a roadmap already, a funding roadmap that the carriers have committed to, that will allow us to invest and enhance Dash for several years after we go live.
What about outside of Dash? Like if you could just throw the board to the wind and James get his hand into some problem solving along the same lines of data and connectedness, where would you go?
We've mentioned MVR a couple of times, and I think there is a real opportunity that the task force that are guiding the development of Dash have spent an extensive amount of time talking about the frustrations with MVRs. And what's interesting about the frustrations with MVRs is they're jurisdictional in nature. So we hear very good things about MVRs in PEI. We hear lots of frustrations pretty much everywhere else. Frustrations ranging from the high price of accessing MVRs. In some cases, the timeliness or lack of timeliness related to MVRs. And in many cases, just the sort of the either inconsistent or incomplete data that's available in the MVRs. So when you kind of put all those things together, the task force see a genuine opportunity to steer the ship, or at least get a hand in steering the ship and improving some of those frustrations.
James, you mentioned the insurance validation process in Ontario. So I'm in Nova Scotia. We don't have that sort of thing here. Tell me more about how that works.
Sure. So the insurance validation program is something that we put in where are we now, 11, 12 years ago. And it's a partnership program with the Ministry of Transportation in Ontario, where we use the same data, so the same stat data that's reported across the industry. And we're able to provide a confirmation of valid insurance, both for Service Ontario kiosks when you go to renew your license plate sticker, and also for law enforcement. So we now respond to about 1.2 million queries to the insurance validation database every month in Ontario, and the majority of that is law enforcement at roadside. And really, it's a very straightforward query. It's just, can you confirm that based on this driver, on this registration plate, license plate, that valid insurance exists? They get a yes or a no in response to that, and it's obviously useful at roadside.
So this might be a question for Don or his successor. When the time comes, and if it's $40 million worth of reports or $40 million worth of revenue that a province is getting on these MVRs, but yet the same government is trying to push the industry to say that prices are too high, they're adding a lot of cost to that system. Can we begin to call them out on that?
We've made that connection, especially in Ontario, predominantly in Ontario. We have had conversations in Alberta as well, but there is no question that accessing MVRs drives cost into the system. And if they could either change the pricing model for MVRs from a transaction based to a subscription based, even that would make a huge difference, not just in reducing cost, but enabling online quoting, for example, and reducing or at least limiting cost of online quoting. So yeah, we have engaged our Ontario government relations colleagues to engage in those discussions with the Ministry of Transportation and the Ministry of Finance, and they do see it. It's not as though they're oblivious to that connection. It's just it's a big revenue. It's a big revenue generator at the moment, and they obviously need to think through the consequences of making any changes.
Do you have, are you going to be tackling habitational insurance tracking system like they have hits at CGI? Do you have access to the property data too? Like this is auto and driver. Do you have also access to all the property claims history too? And is that something on the list to look into?
So we used to collect, IBC on behalf of Giza, used to collect it wasn't on behalf of Giza. We used to collect a property plan, a personal lines plan. But the problem was it wasn't mandated by Giza. It was voluntary. So the data was incomplete and inconsistent, and there was almost no use to that data, which is why we discontinued it over 10 years ago now. Because there isn't a stat plan, you run into the same issues as I mentioned earlier with the commercial inconsistency. So that's the problem with the personal lines, the habitational data, that unless we were to kind of think dramatically as an industry that we want to start reporting this data in a consistent mandated way, then there really isn't a way to generate a product like Dash for property.
Because I think the big thing is if we stop competing on trying to dig down and track down the data and paying tons of money for it and start competing on the actuary and the analytics and stuff to build the rates with the data, that would be a good shift, right? There's just a lot of waste and friction that's caused by it. So the more we can take that out of the industry, the better it is for everybody for the future.
The concept of the industry making use of its own data is something that a number of people around the task force have commented on. It's not something that the industry do particularly well at the moment, and this is an example where not monetizing the value of the data, but they're leveraging their own data for the gain of the industry and the gain of consumers in turn. So that I think is the one that comes to mind, and I think it's just a very positive mindset change that the industry have got to.
Is retention important to your brokerage? Of course it is. That's why at IFS, we have a cancellation prevention process. Want more details? Give us a call. I know you don't always use a premium finance company, but when you do, you should use IFS. Cheers.